somewhere along the way, people got this misguided idea that in order to be successful at meditation, you have to reach this state of nirvana where nothing bothers you. And it couldn't be further from the truth. So, for example, if I'm sitting for 20 minutes or maybe doing a Tai Chi form or a movement practice, if I get distracted 50 times during that session, every time I get distracted, I recognize the imbalance and I bring myself back to focus. Now I just got 50 repetitions of being distracted and off center and coming back to balance. And if I do that every day, every month, every year, I start to develop this power and this ability to be in any kind of stressful situation and bring myself back to that center and find that strength and that power to be more stable and more grounded in everything you do.
Jeff Paterson, you are very welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You have over 36 years experience and black belts in multiple martial arts and meditation. First thing I'm thinking is I probably shouldn't pick a fight with you, but but you're on the other side of the planet, so I'm relatively safe. But that's a lifelong passion. How did that all start, and what is it that drives you to stick with something for 36 years?
I've always, as a child, been interested in martial arts, but I grew up in a single parent family and we didn't have a lot of financial resources. And so I didn't have the opportunity to train as a child. And then at a fairly young age, I got my first job and I started making a little bit of money. And in my mid-teens, I started doing martial arts at a local academy in the small town where I grew up. I was enjoying it and I having a lot of fun and it was clicking with me, but it was never really a passion back then. And I continued with it. And then I met a boxing coach up here in Portland, Oregon, after I got out of the Marine Corps. And he kind of opened my eyes up to a lot of different things. I used to go to a boxing gym that was just a few blocks down the street here from my academy. And at a boxing gym, it's run a lot different than your traditional style fitness classes where you come in and there's a teacher leading a group of students. At a boxing gym, usually there's 4 or 5 coaches running around, and each one of those coaches might have a handful of fighters that they're working with. Well, at this one particular gym, one of the coaches was a very well-known coach. He had created champions in both the amateur and professional arena. And I wanted to get to spend some time with him, but his card was full and he wasn't taking on any new athletes. And so I would always show up at the gym when I knew he was going to be there training some of his guys and work hard and try to get him to recognize me. And finally, after following him around for about 3 or 4 months, he started giving me some tips and helping me out a little bit. And it was only about 2 or 3 weeks of getting to work with him when he said something to me that changed my life forever. And that he said, if you really want to be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. Now, at the time, I was this young kid thinking, isn't that for like old people in the park? How's that going to help me be a better fighter? And I had a lot of respect for him. I started following the practice. And it's changed my life in so many ways. And through the years, I've had over 36,000 students come through my academy. And I've heard hundreds of stories of how the meditative arts has positively influenced people's lives. And that's what's made me so passionate about writing my last few books and creating my online program and just trying to get this word out there and help as many people as I can with the meditative arts.
What do you mean by the meditative arts?
Meditative arts are anything from like sitting meditation, standing meditation, breathing strategies. Qigong is referred to as the science of the breath because there's hundreds of different breathing practices, movement practices like Qigong or Tai Chi or yoga, different things that we can use to integrate the meditative practices into our life. Because what a lot of people don't understand when they hear the word meditation is they think it's very narrowly focused and it's about, breathing and being in this peaceful place. Well, the meditative arts is very expansive, and there's a lot of different paths you can follow when taking on a meditation practice. And I break them down into kind of five main paths that we follow. There's more of the athletic side of the practice, where we do these practices to help improve our physical performance. So you'll see these days there's many athletes, professional and amateur these days, that see the benefits of the meditative arts, and they do that to help improve their timing, their awareness, their mental stability, their ability to kind of focus and come back to center and stay present in the moment. There's all these benefits that they get that help them perform at a higher level. Then we have the therapeutic side of the practice, which is great for longevity and working through injuries and dealing with our overall health and wellness. Then there's the medical side of the practice, which all of Chinese medicine theory comes from Qigong, which has been around for over 4,000 years. Then there's the philosophical side of the practice, which has always been a passion of mine. And it's kind of like it opens up your peripheral vision, so you start seeing things from multiple different angles and helps you be more strategic in anything you do. And then lastly, there's the spiritual side of the practice. And so as you start to follow a meditation practice, you could follow any one of these paths and build an evolving life practice with ritual practices, active practices, and philosophical practices to help you kind of follow down that direction.
That sounds like a very rich offering, as opposed to coming to your, I don't know if you call it a gym or a dojo or center just to learn fighting. It sounds like such a rich offering of possibilities for students.
Yeah, so here at my academy, we have four different adult programs. We have our Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which is grappling, learning kind of mat work and on the ground. We have our striking program where we do boxing and Muay Thai. We have a JKD and a Eskrima program that's geared around kind of the Filipino martial arts. And then lastly, we have our meditative arts program where we work with all of these different meditative practices. And sometimes you'll get people in here that cross train in one or two of those. And the majority of the time, people will come in and focus on one path and they'll work on that. While I love all of the martial arts we do, I've always kind of had a strong passion and a drive towards the meditative practice ever since I kind of started as a pretty young guy.
I don't know if you remember many, many years ago, could be 40 or more years ago, there was a show on TV called Kung Fu. Was it
Oh yeah.
David Carradine? I think I don't know how that comes to me just now, but I remember watching as a kid, so it could even be 50 years ago. But what I remember about it was in the show. So the was always remembering back to when he was a student, and I'm studying kung fu, and so there was two things appeared to be always going on. One is he was learning how to be this lethal fighter, which he was, but there was such a level of peace and calm and the wisdom that came from his teacher. Now those things almost seem to be opposing, that you could have this deep peace and wisdom and yet be physically a lethal weapon. But they seem both opposing and seem to fit. How does that all make sense?
My most recent book, The Yielding Warrior, helps to answer that question. And a lot of times people hear the word yielding and they think, I don't want to give up. I don't want to be weak. If I yield, I feel like I'm giving in, and especially when you get somebody coming in here and wanting to box and they're aggressive and they got that type A personality
Yeah.
and they hear the sound yielding, they just think that, they're not going to their potential.
Mm.
But the idea of yielding is so much deeper than that. And it's very strategic, and it's been used in military battles. It's used in fighting. It's used in strategy. And it's a very powerful concept that we can integrate into everything we do in life. I've broken down yielding into three basic pillars. We have physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. Physical yielding is the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force. And now I can respond with less effort. So I'm not trying to butt heads with you and see if I'm bigger and stronger than you. And it's easy to see how this is beneficial in any kind of athletics because oftentimes we're going to come up against other athletes that are bigger, stronger, and faster than us. And if we try to butt heads with them, we're going to lose. Now, in order to be good at physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. You need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you can change your central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed. The breath has to be calm. And the mind has to be present. Now, while this may be a lifetime to really master these skills, once you start to see these things inside yourself, this is where it becomes very interesting. And we start noticing these things in other people. And this is where we move into what I call mental yielding. So, say, for example, you and I are having a conversation and I say something that unsettles you. And I pick up on it right from that first sign of imbalance. It's a lot easier at this point to adjust the conversation and keep us in a harmonious place than if I'm not paying attention to that. And pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to knock me upside the head. And
Mm.
so learning how to use yielding in all of our interactions is extremely powerful. One, we're being more considerate, which is something that we could all do more of. And two, it allows us to be strategic where we can guide conversations to a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And this is obviously good in our relationships, it's good in
Mm.
business, good in sales, good in negotiations. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can apply this concept. And then the third pillar of yielding is emotional yielding. And emotional yielding is very much like mental yielding, but with our own interpersonal conflicts. So you think about maybe something happens to us and we respond and we go down this path and we might get an hour, a day, a week down the road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice.
Yeah.
But with yielding and our ability to stay present and not let our emotions get involved and be aware of what's going on, a lot of times we can make a more educated choice than getting emotionally distracted and making a choice that maybe we might regret later down the road. And so, this idea of learning how to integrate these concepts into everything we do can be very powerful. And I've been explaining this idea of yielding now for over 30 years. I've been running my academy, and oftentimes I'll hear people say, yielding makes a lot of sense. In fact, I do yielding all the time.
Mm.
Well, I would agree in that I think everybody does some degree of yielding all the time, whether they recognize that's what it's called or not. However, it's kind of like if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years, I guarantee you that person would see things about the series of events and the
Mm.
timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. And the meditative arts helps us see things inside of ourselves and inside of other people that I truly believe most people will go through life and never have any clue of unless they
Mm.
have a practice like this in their life.
So many questions there, but the last one that comes to mind is what what type of things do you think people will see within themselves that they might not have otherwise become aware of?
Well, there's so many, not just on a mental side of thought, but it's in our physiology, it's in our breath, it's in our mental thoughts, it's in our energetic
Mm.
movement in the body, it's in our spirit and our awareness of the spirit, which we call these the five regulations. So we have regulating the body, the breath, the mind, the energy, and the spirit. And briefly, I'll kind of touch on what I mean by this. And by heightening this awareness is what we start to see more clearly. So, for example, regulating the body is where we usually start with a meditation practice because it's the one that we can make the quickest changes from and see immediate results. And an example would be, think about maybe you're sitting down at your computer for 3 or 4 hours and your posture's weak and you're
Mm.
feeling burnout and lethargic and maybe your neck's getting sore. And then another time when the most important person in your world walks in the room and your body perks up and you feel like you're on top of the world. Well, these two different energetic states we're in control of all of the time.
Mm.
And so, understanding how to regulate our posture and our muscular tension in the body can help change our overall physiology. And this is like a basic level of regulating the body. On a little deeper level, it involves maintaining some level of muscular structure in the body, some level of flexibility, making sure we're eating a healthy diet so we keep up the energy in the body and getting enough sleep. Now, when we move from the body, we go into the breath regulation. The breath regulation is an extremely deep topic. And I mentioned earlier that Qigong is often referred to as the science of the breath because there's hundreds of different breathing strategies. And because of that, we kind of broadly categorize them into yin methods and yang methods. Yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style of breathing meditations that bring the energy inward. An example of this that we do every day is if you ever listen to somebody sleep, their natural breathing pattern is a longer inhale and a shorter exhale. And this is the body's natural way of bringing your conscious mind into your subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. Now, this style of energetic expression with the breath is great for stress reduction, dealing with anxiety, with panic attacks. It's good for boosting your creativity. Then we have the yang side of the breath. The yang side of the breath is more aggressive. It's kind of like if you ever had to push your car or you pick up something heavy,
Yeah.
your natural instinct is to exhale and put tension in the breath and make it audible. And this helps expand the energy and lead it outward. Now, when we understand how to use the breath strategically, we can use it to modify and control our physiology, our mental well being, and our emotional states. And so it's a very important tool with this kind of practice. And part of it is by doing this, we start to heighten our awareness and notice these imbalances before they get too far off track. Then there's regulating the mind. And regulating the mind is a very deep topic and something that you'll train for the rest of your life if you're doing the meditative arts. And the basic idea is, you know, I've heard many times through the years, I've tried meditation, but I just couldn't quiet my mind. And somewhere along the way, people got this misguided idea that in order to be successful at meditation, you have to reach this state of nirvana where nothing bothers you. And it couldn't be further from the truth. So, for example, if I'm sitting for 20 minutes or maybe doing a Tai Chi form or a movement practice, if I get distracted 50 times during that session, every time I get distracted, I recognize the imbalance and I bring myself back to focus. Now, I just got 50 repetitions of being distracted and off center and coming back to balance. And if I do that every day, every month, every year, I start to develop this power and this ability to be in any kind of stressful situation and bring myself back to that center and find that strength and that power to be more stable and more grounded in everything you do. You know, there's this story that I really enjoy about these two old monks, and they're walking down this dirt road after a huge rainstorm, and they come up to this big mud puddle. And on the other side of the puddle is this beautiful little girl, and she's standing there in a white dress and she's crying. And the older monk, he hollers across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." And so he rolls up his pant legs and he walks across the puddle and picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her to the other side, sets her down, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking a couple miles down the road. And finally, the younger monk is just furious and he says, "You know we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk looks down and says, "Why are you still carrying that girl? I left her back there at the puddle." And how many times in life do we need to get 2 miles down the muddy road before we realize we got to let this go, you know? And so this idea of regulating the mind is a very important part of the practice. And then the fourth regulation is regulating the energy. And this is, you know, something we could talk for hours about, but a basic idea of it is Once you've reached a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, we now have the tools to lead the energy in the body and lead it inward, extend it outward, or maybe circulate it through different patterns in the body. And this is great to get different responses with our practice. And then the fifth and final regulation is regulating the spirit. And this is a very profound idea and something that meditation practitioners will spend their entire life's journey working to develop this higher level of awareness and sensitivity in this area. And so, as you can see, by cultivating these five underlying principles of a meditative practice, we start to develop a heightened sense of awareness and an ability to do things that affect everything we do in life.
It's interesting, again, so much in there. When you talk about regulating the energy, there's a question comes from mind, and it may be something you have some insight on. I've had a meditation practice for about 40 years since I was in my late teens. It's something I get into very young, and it's something I took to sort of practice almost every day. Something I noticed very early on was that when I was meditating, I would experience energy moving in my body. Sometimes I'd think I was moving. I'd have to open my eyes and realize wasn't moving. But now, all the years later, regularly when I meditate, I'm going to say I feel energy moving in my body. I don't know what it is. I just have this experience of energy moving in my body. And when I notice it and rest into it, it kind of engulfs my body, and it's a really, really relaxing experience. I don't know what it is. When you talk about, I wonder if you have any insight into what that is. And when you talk about energy in the body, is it that type of experience of energy in the body, or what do you mean by it?
So we have two different kinds of energy in the body. We have what we call upper level energy and lower level energy. Upper level energy comes from the breath. And the breath is a very important tool because it can help us regulate and lead the energy and give us a positive or negative charge in what we're doing. And then we have what we call a lower level energy. And lower level energy is, every cell in the body, and you can test this and see the charge, has a positive and a negative charge. And so when we start to learn how to store this energy, and in our main energetic center in the body is what our lower dantian, and it's basically all of your guts and intestines. And if you notice anywhere in the body where we have these energy centers, you'll see layers of a good conductor, a poor conductor, and a good conductor. And so oftentimes in Chinese philosophy, they'll refer to the false dantian, and this is that area that's in your lower abdomen. And if you look, there's 6 layers of fat and fascia, which are poor conductors and good conductors. And the reason why this is such a valuable part in your practice is because of this area and your ability to control it with muscle, we can generate a strong charge and get that energy moving. And then we can lead it into the lower dantian, which is our biggest battery in the body where we store this energy. And once we have that energy in the lower dantian, we can circulate it through the different meridians and channels in the body. And there's different meditative practices that we will use to cultivate different outcomes from our practice. And so, the energy is a very important part of the training.
But you can actually experience it moving in your body.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Um, this idea of the yielding warrior is a very interesting and appealing idea. And when you were talking about it, what struck me was it almost seems like the difference between reaction and response. So you approach me physically or say something insulting or whatever to me, and I immediately react to you. And it seems like the yielding warrior approach is this ability to uh, lean back in that, almost let and then choose how I respond, or whether that's a a martial artist on the mat choosing how to physically respond, or me sitting in your office having a business conversation and choosing how to respond. So it seems like for want of a better word, a very powerful tool and practice in every part of life.
Oh, for sure. And I like the words you chose with which was response and
Mm,
reaction, because that's very important. So often in today's society, we're trained to react.
mm,
Somebody says something, we react, and we come back with, equal or greater force. And
mm,
that's how these arguments and these confrontations escalate. But if we can yield and we can respond and we can listen and really take it in and see it from
mm,
a wider perspective, it allows us to choose a strategic response instead of an emotional response, which can help us get where we need to go, maybe without having to butt heads, maybe helping them see it from a different perspective or
mm,
finding an angle that's mutually beneficial. There's so many different ways that if you just take your time and listen and pay
mm.
attention, how this can help you in, like you said, anything we do.
But also, argument just spurs argument. So if you become aggressive to me and I respond aggressively to you, it literally turns into a spiral. And I have certainly found over the years that when people become aggressive with me, that not that it happens often, but just argumentative. If I wouldn't have used the word language leading because I hadn't come across that before, but maybe it's the meditative practice would have me maybe lean back from that and just give it a moment. Deepak Chopra refers to it as the gap, just that moment between the event happening and how I respond, and in that moment you get to choose response. Sometimes I'm watching that. I was watching the evening news a couple of weeks ago, and there had been a murder on the streets of Dublin, and it was a fight in the middle of the night, and it was on the streets and it was CCTV. So in 24 hours they'd caught unfortunately a young man had died, but they'd caught the culprit. And I was thinking to myself, possibly there's a guy, unfortunately, one guy is dead, but there's another guy in a jail cell now who at 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe with alcohol or drugs consumed, reacted in an argument situation, pulled in a knife, and dramatically took one life and also destroyed his own life simply because of that reaction. And I always think how really powerful it is when someone has the ability, like if in that moment, whether he was insulted or whatever, he just walked away, two lives or many lives would have been extraordinarily different.
And when you start thinking about this and understanding this concept and seeing different ways to strategically apply it,
Mm.
it's almost kind of fun when somebody comes at you with a little bit of negativity or aggression, because it's kind of a challenge to see
Yeah.
if you can calm them down and then bring them down a positive path. And I always kind of play with this, because if somebody comes to me and they're unstable or unbalanced and I can let them walk away feeling better than when
Mm.
they came, that's a pretty powerful ability. And it's something that, I think that if more people could do, the world would be such a better place.
It's interesting. It's a practice I have used in the boardroom, never on the mat. I'm not a fighter, but in the boardroom I've used it, and thankfully my boardroom is a peaceful place now, but it wasn't always that way many years ago. And there would have been times when, sorry, there are definitely times when I reacted to people and struck out verbally, but as a result of that caused stress to people, caused stress to myself, and caused a whole lot of problems. In other words, I was responding to one problem there, but because of my response I now created five problems to deal with that would be dealt with for months and months and months. And eventually I learned to take control of my mouth, and I would and when so if someone would trigger me, I would choose to remain calm. Now if you looked inside, there was a ball of fire going off, but I began to choose not to react. So I would sit there and go, you're not controlling how I respond. So I would just sit quietly and calm, and when I would respond it would be how I chosen to respond, and as you say, it would be strategic. It wouldn't be leading to problems. What I found when I started doing that was in the early, I'm going to say days, maybe even in the early years, I found that extraordinarily difficult. I mean, it literally was all my willpower to remain calm. But over the years, it has probably become a default. And I would say now, a 90, I mean, I'm still like anyone, you can trigger me, but it's very difficult to rile me now. It's my natural. So I've done that training, like you spoke about the meditation area, and it has probably become my natural response now.
Yeah. Well, and then doing that meditation for as long as you have,
Mm.
that's great for just helping you expand your awareness so you can make those adjustments before you get too far out of balance. Because what happens is a lot of people don't recognize it until they're 2 miles down the
Yeah.
muddy road. But if you can recognize it on your first step, it's a lot easier to make the adjustment than before it gains too much negative momentum.
Yes, I think it's a practice, and that's interesting that you say that people might not recognize it. I just assume that everyone noticed it, but you certainly can. It certainly can radically change outcomes. What I'm wondering, it seems a wonderful mix to connect that with fighting on the mat, because it's one thing me and you having an argument and me choosing to respond calmly or to yield, as you say. But the yielding warrior seems to me to be a whole other level, because if someone is physically attacking you, whether that's in the street or in a competition or just in training, to remain calm when someone is physically attacking you must be a whole other level of skill and self-awareness.
Yeah, and you watch this in any good fighter. It doesn't matter if it's boxing or an MMA event or whatever kind of fighting that you like to watch. If you see somebody who's tense and aggressive versus somebody who's stone cold and they're just settled and they're rooted and they're able to respond, it's a lot easier for them to get ahead because they don't have to let go of that tension to
Yeah.
respond. They're already ready to be in the
Mm.
moment. And it's the same thing with any kind of athletics. And that's why so many professional athletes these days are turning to the meditative arts because it helps them recognize those physical, mental, and emotional imbalances to help them be more focused and more efficient in whatever it is they're doing.
And I suppose when you're in competition or when you're sparring, it's some degree it's like a chess game. If you take an immediate emotional reaction or response to your opponent and make the wrong move, you're probably giving them an opening
Yeah.
to strike against you.
For sure. Yeah. It's anytime, it's like that in basketball. If you think about the shot you miss for 10 seconds or 5 seconds, you just hurt your team because, you're
Yeah.
down a path where you're not going to be able to perform. But if you can let that go right away, maybe you get hit and now you're just back in the moment and present and
Yeah.
focused. It helps you be a lot more fluid, and that's one of the things that meditation is so powerful, is having that ability to stay present underneath any distraction.
I suppose also if you're relaxed and you're in any sort of physical endeavor and you fall or you're hurt or whatever, you're less likely to injure yourself if the body is relaxed than if the body is tense.
Yes.
I have a son who lives in London who is very interested in Mai Tai. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Muay Thai. Yeah.
Muay Thai, yeah, he loves Muay Thai, and and it's just as you're talking, I have three adult sons, but it's just you talking. He's my middle son. He's 27. He may be the most relaxed and easygoing
Uh,
of my three sons, and it's interesting that this should appeal to him. But he absolutely loves it. So maybe that meditative nature, it's just I just find it, I find it a very interesting mix. But now that we're talking, um, it seems to make sense. I know you do a mix of obviously you have your academy, but you have online training programs as well. So can you talk to me a little bit about what you do online and what it is people can learn in an online program?
yeah. So my online program is geared around helping people learn how to build an evolving life practice with the meditative arts finding what path they want to follow, and then integrating different practices from rituals, active practices, and philosophical practices that help them down whichever path that is, whether it's the athletic path or the health and wellness, or they're looking for more deeper spiritual development, whatever that is. And then we also have our instructor training, which is geared towards people who own martial arts or yoga studios, and they're looking to bring another program into their business. You know, most martial arts and yoga studios, they target 20s, 30s, and 40s, or their average
Mm.
adult
Yeah.
ages. Whereas on a meditation program here at my academy, we have a lot of 50s, 60s, 70s, and even some 80s in the program. And the great thing about that is they like coming in during the day when most martial arts and yoga studios are pretty vacant and
Yeah.
empty. And so we can build up classes during that time. And, you know, here at my academy, we only offer 6 of these meditation classes a week, and it generates an additional $40,000 a month to the academy
Wow.
bottom line. And so when you can show other businesses how to have this resource in their program, it can really change their business and help them a lot with building a thriving community in their studio.
That is enormous additional revenue.
Yes.
Qigong and Tai Chi, can you they come under the meditative practice as I understand it. Can you talk to me a little bit about the difference between both?
Yeah, so Qigong is very deep. There's many different directions of the practice. You can do it for kind of the spiritual side of the practice. There's the therapeutic side. There's the martial side. There's the philosophical side. You know, all of Chinese medicine is based off of Qigong theory. So there's that avenue. It talks about different breathing strategies, energetic cultivations in the body. It's very good for your health and your stability and building root and mental focus. There's all these things that come from that. Now, Tai Chi was originally generated as a martial art. You know, a lot of people will say Tai Chi, but really Tai Chi Chuan is the martial art. Tai Chi is the energy or the force that is used in, you know, in Taoism, they call it the way or the Tao, which is any kind of energetic imbalance that takes from that stillness into any kind of creation. So, like when you look at the yin yang symbol, you see this ever changing path of going from yin to yang, and one is feeding into the other. Well, when we start understanding that this is three dimensional and we see how these changes of this Tai Chi force can lead to energetic expressions in the body. Now, when we apply the martial to that energy, that's where we get into what we call Tai Chi. Now, originally, Tai Chi was just a martial art. And back thousands of years ago, when Buddha Dhammo came over from India, he saw a lot of the monks in China who were very beat up and broken from training so hard in the
Mm.
martial arts. And so he taught them how to integrate these energetic principles of the Qigong into the Tai Chi. And they started getting more healthy and they started living longer. And so these days, you know, if you go around the country, I would bet there's probably less than 5% of all the Tai Chi schools out there even really know how to use it as a martial art. Most people are doing it for the health benefits, and that's because they've integrated Qigong into the Tai Chi training. So, a lot of times when you do Tai Chi, you can kind of be doing Qigong as well.
Okay.
But when you're doing Qigong, you're not doing Tai Chi, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. Um, I have at different times considered doing both. I haven't done either. I've considered doing both. And many, maybe a decade ago, I was in India, and one of the meditative practices we did was meditative walking, where we had to walk around and just be entirely present with the movement of our feet and the walking. And it was a beautiful experience. And as a lifelong meditator, I had never really brought meditation into movement. And so it was this experience of walking, but the experience of quiet was the same as meditation. So I said to myself that it would be interesting to do one or the other. Um, I'm familiar with Tai Chi. When I say I'm familiar, I recognize it because you see them on the when you see it on TV and that sort of stuff. So it looks like people doing very slow martial arts. Is Qigong a movement?
Yeah, Qigong is a movement.
Qigong, my apologies.
Yeah, and with any kind of meditation practice, whether you're a sitting
Mm,
practitioner or a standing meditation, I think it's really good to have some movement
mm,
practices integrated into your daily rituals because
yes.
by developing that awareness of how the energy moves through the body, it helps us get to
Mm.
deeper levels of practice, even in our sitting or our standing meditation. And so the movement practices are very important, I think, when we're following a meditative practice.
And maybe this is a hard question to answer, but would you point me to one or the other in particular?
No, I think they're both good. It just depends on, where it is it's coming from and how the teacher is
Mm,
delivering it. Um, I think that, if you like uh, the sitting meditation, an easy transition could be the qigong. However, the tai chi is kind of a little bit more diverse in that you might really enjoy that, having that kind of two ends of the spectrum and then
mm.
seeing how they come together. So I think you may enjoy both. And if you've been meditating for 40 years, I think you probably really resonate with them.
Is is can you do either of those online, or is it something you need to go and find a local teacher for?
Definitely. Yeah. And in my online program, I teach Qigong and Tai Chi as well as each one and many different movement practices, sitting practices, standing practices. Now, that said, if you have a high level teacher that is in your area,
Mm,
it's always better to get that personal transaction and see that. But I think that making sure that you have somebody that really understands that there's multiple different directions to take the practice and how to build an evolving life
mm,
practice because there's pretty much a Tai Chi place at every,
mm.
center around town, and it's easy to get caught up in a place that's very surface level.
Yeah.
And having somebody, I think, that has some depth is probably more valuable to train with them online than it is with somebody with no depth in person.
Yeah, I get that. There's lots of things where you can have a qualification over a weekend,
Yeah.
and I suppose you're really looking for someone with with decades of experience. Um, I really love the idea of yielding, and would certainly recommend the book to anyone. For someone who's listening to this or watching it, or they're listening in their car now, and they're wondering what is something, what is a practice that they can take away? What is something that they can go, I can implement this like immediately, that will have an impact on their lives? Is there anything you could guide people to that would be an easy takeaway for someone?
I think it's a little bit more conceptual when you ask that question, if you don't mind if I kind of detour a little bit in that, one of my most challenging things as a teacher for over 30 years is that trying to get people to understand the benefits of this practice and really integrating it into their life. And so I've come up with three considerations that I like people to spend a little bit of time with before they're coming to the practice. And I find that it helps them be more successful if they put some heartfelt thought into these. And the first one is thinking about why are they coming to the practice and what is it that they want to get out of this practice?
Mm,
Because when they have that idea, it helps give them a little bit of fuel. And then not just think about what that surface level why is, but what are 10 or 20 things that will positively change if they accomplish that goal in their life through their relationships, for their interpersonal communications, or their business, whatever it is, and then flip the coin and think of 10 or 20 negative things that will happen if they don't accomplish that goal. And by having that fuel, if you will, we're all going to get up one morning and the alarm's going to go off. It's time to do our meditation. Or like, I'll hit the snooze button. I'll do it tomorrow. And if you have that good, strong polling, now it starts to become less of a chore that we have to do and more of something we get to do because we start seeing all of the benefits of the practice. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is understanding consistency. And this is so important with a meditation practice. There's this uh, story about this stone cutter from ancient China, and he's very well known across the land. He makes these beautiful sculptures of these uh, animals and landscapes. And he's so well known that people travel from all over to come to stay with him and learn the trade. Well, every morning, this stonecutter starts his day off by going down to the river and meditating. And one day, after his meditation, he's walking along the river and he has this profound vision of this big 6 foot tall jade mystical Chinese dragon. And he's so taken by this vision that he decides this is going to be his next project. And so, as you can imagine, finding a piece of jade this size is no easy feat. So he travels around the country for about 3 months looking for the perfect stone. He finally finds it. He brings it back to his place, and he spends the next few days just studying the rock and feeling the energy of the rock and trying to envision how this dragon is going to appear out of the stone. When he begins work on the stone, he carefully finds one specific place on the stone, places his chisel, and starts tapping away with his hammer, never moving the chisel, just hitting this one spot, hundreds, if not thousands of times a day, day after day. A few days go by and nothing seems to happen. A few more days go by, still nothing. His apprentices that are watching, they're kind of thinking, and man, should he try something else? And they start second guessing him a little bit. He keeps at it. A few more days go by and he taps the chisel, and this big section comes off the backside of the rock and creates this beautiful, smooth, kind of slightly curved line that's soon going to be part of the dragon's back. And his apprentice, who is watching, says, "How did you know that that tap was going to break the stone?" And he says, "It wasn't that tap that broke the stone. It was the thousands before it that broke the stone." And with a little bit of a discouraged look, the apprentice says, "But I've been watching you and there was no marks on the stone. Why didn't you try something else? Why did you keep doing that?" The stonecutter got down on one knee and he felt the smooth line that he just created. And he said, "Each strike was not wasted. The stone was changing beneath the surface. And even though we couldn't see it with the naked eye, through this consistency and repetition, not only was the stone changing, but so was the one who wields the hammer."
Mm.
And I love this story because so often with the meditative arts, we're practicing these breathing strategies, these sitting practice, these movement practices, studying these philosophical concepts that often we don't see what's changing day to day. But through that consistent effort, we bear the fruits that later we can reap and see so many benefits from. And then the third and final consideration is you need to find a guide. There's so much information out there. You could go onto YouTube and see a billion videos on this practice and that practice. And, I've been running this academy for 30 years, and I'll get people that come in here sometimes that have been self taught and they've been training 10, 15 years. And they'll get discouraged because they'll see somebody that's been in here for 6 or 12 months that's deeper into the practice because they've had somebody helping to point them in the right direction. So, our life is short, your time is valuable. Find somebody to help you along the path so you can really reap the benefits of the practice. So, thinking about what your why is in depth with some heartfelt thought, understanding the importance of consistency, and having somebody in your corner to help point you down the path is what's going to help you be most successful with a meditation practice.
That is such great advice. I love the story of the stonecutter, and you mentioned earlier about people with this expectation that in meditation their mind will quiet. And I often say to people that after 40 years, I meditate every morning, and I regularly sit down and do not want to sit down. And my heart races and my mind races, and it's almost like my body saying, "Get up and get on with your day." But I recognize that because that's what happens frequently. And I know if I just sit with this for the next five, whatever it is, it'll eventually subside. But the other side of it, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes that sensation to go and movement doesn't. I could sit there for 30 minutes and it doesn't. I go, well, I'm just as worked up when I start as I finished. But when I go on about my day, then I do it with a sense of calm. And I look back and go, I thought there was no progress. I thought there was no progress. But the reason I share that, it's like the stonecutter story, is because I think many people would start any of these practices and think, I've been doing this for 2 weeks. I can't do it. It's it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime of practice. Um, I think the big takeaways for me, and I hope from people listening for this, are a few things. One is this idea of consistency. Anything we do is a lifelong. It's part of a life. It's a lifelong practice. It's not a practice to achieve something. It's just a lifelong practice. But this notion of the yielding warrior, I truly, I wouldn't have used those words, yielding warrior, but I can relate to what you say, because that has been so valuable in my life, this ability to step back and then choose to respond as opposed to react. I think to almost anyone listening to this podcast, that is a super concept and a huge piece of hugely valuable piece of information. Before we finish, Jeff, two things. Just, you might pick up the book and show it to the audience there, just so that I see you have it behind you. Have you got it? Is that the book? Just
Yeah.
give, just pick it up and show it to people. So the Yielding Warrior by Jeff Paterson. It looks brilliant. I highly recommend it. People get their hands on it. And where can people find you and more about your programs?
So if you're interested in the book, it's on Amazon, of course. Also, right now, I'm giving away a free copy of the book. If you just go to my website, theyieldingwarrior.com/book, you could get a free copy, just pay for
Wow.
shipping and handling. Also at theyieldingwarrior.com, I have my 2 week trial where you can get into the program and kind of see what we're doing and learn some of these practices, from standing meditation, breath work, sitting practices, movement practices like Tai Chi and Qigong. There's multiple different Qigong practices up there and different Tai Chi forms and sets. And then I also have my teacher training program that's up there as well.
Excellent. So what I will do is, in the show notes, for anyone who's interested, I will put a link to the book, and I will put a link to the website as well, so anyone can track you down. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've learned so much from listening to this. I'm delighted I invited you on. I think there's a huge amount of value there. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure chatting with you.